Good morning everyone, welcome back to my channel. We have another very foggy, cloudy day here in the Karoo. So I came here with no specific plan this morning, a bit of scouting, maybe some clouds. There are some clouds in the distance rolling over the mountains that are quite nice. And maybe a tree or two in the fog. If the clouds roll in low enough, they roll over the mountains, as you can see behind me at the moment. But where I am here on a ridge, there's nothing here yet. But there's always hope. But thanks for joining me again. Let's see what I can capture this morning. Maybe there's something worthwhile. Some really nice clouds rolling in over the distant mountains. Well, not so distant mountains. This is at 200 millimeters at the moment. So if you look at my composition here, what I specifically like here are the layers. I love layers like this. Dark foreground, very dark foreground, two ridges crossing in the middle, and then another ridge behind it, also dark, and then we've got a layer of dark rolling clouds, and then another layer of high, far higher, very light clouds, and then the very top layer, which is just fluffy stuff. So this is definitely a layery shot. I ended up taking a couple of different photos here. First we have the slightly more zoomed in version. This is at 200 millimeters. Again, I really like the layers, the two different foreground layers, the darker one towards the right, the slightly lighter one towards the left, both of them tapering towards the middle, and then behind them another layer, slightly more in the distance, slightly more foggy, and then the clouds above them, again at least three layers of clouds with lots of interesting patterns in the clouds. Overall it makes for quite a nice composition. As you can see, I ended up shooting two different versions of this. Just the only difference is really that the clouds moved a bit. Every 2 or 3 minutes there was a different composition to be had. The only issue here was a bit, the highlights were very bright towards the top middle of the clouds. So I had to pull back the highlights quite a bit there not to burn them out. And then here we have the version slightly zoomed out, about 100 millimeters. Just to get some more foreground interest, specifically the reddish earth, dry semi-desert with a small little plants in the foreground. Overall, I think it makes for quite a nice contrast with a bluish, brightish sky above, and still the interesting tapering mountains in the middle. Overall, I'm quite happy with this composition and the clouds. It was actually quite a surprise to get that particular composition there. I wasn't planning on it, but suddenly you just see it and then you know this can work. Just grab it and use it. Here is a composition I quite like, specifically the rather colorful bushes in the foreground, specifically the one towards the right, just on the horizon. There are at least 3 or 4 colors mixed into the same bush, different plants, and then of course the mountain behind with some clouds rolling in over it adds a lot of interest. In the foreground, this tiny little bush, spiky little bush, anchors the image nicely. I'm not 100% happy with the dark bush on the left hand side, so I think this is at 28 millimeters. I'll probably recompose, maybe even do a vertical shot to try and exclude that and get a bit more of the mountain in. But overall I think there's a start here, there's a potential composition here. I think this vertical shot works better, for me anyway. A bit too much sky, but I can crop that out and make it a more square image. But the foreground is now better. I've got this bottom left hand, the spiky little bush, and then the more colorful bush in the midground, and then in the background I've got those beautiful rolling clouds, and there's just a tiny bit of light starting to peek out through the top layer of clouds. So maybe I might even get some interest in the clouds in the next few minutes. Here we have the first images captured. The landscape version of the image. I ended up cropping a bit away from the left hand side anyway. There was just a bush there that was just too busy, but I really do like the foreground, very small little bush against the contrasting red ground, and then the layer of bushes going diagonally across from left hand towards the middle, focusing on the main subject there, that bush that is really beautiful, the fluffy bush almost in the middle. And then of course the beautiful clouds with all the shapes covering the mountains in the distance with a bit of fog there in the valley. Overall quite nice. I would have preferred the highlights to be slightly lower in the sky. There's a tiny bit there that is almost on the edge of being overexposed, but overall I like the image. I've got the vertical image here as well, the vertical composition. I actually prefer it because now the little bush in the foreground sits on the bottom third, and the main bush, the main subject, is in the middle of the image. Again, still the beautiful clouds above with all the patterns and interesting shapes, and the contrast in the cold sky and the warmish foreground overall I think works quite nicely for me. But I think between these two I prefer the portrait, the vertical composition, over the other one. It includes only the important elements and not too much other stuff that just complicates the image. Well, I found another image here. I think it also works better as a vertical composition. Some nice rocks in the foreground, and they're slightly wet. It's just started raining lightly, and even some droppings, antelope droppings here in the foreground, the little round black objects. And then this very tiny little bush here with the bright green leaves, almost reddish stems, and then in the background mountain with clouds rolling in, and even a tiny bit of blue sky almost starting to peek out. Overall quite a nice composition. I think there's some rocks to the right hand side that I would have liked to include. Maybe I can, but behind them there's some really very complicated bushes, too busy, far too busy to work in this composition. But I think I'll move slightly to the right, maybe that'll work. Well, I ended up preferring the original composition. I like the centerpiece, the speck boom in the middle, nice green colorful bush, with the rocks in the foreground diagonally leading your eye from the bottom left towards the center and towards the bush, plus some other interesting rocks in the foreground as well, including the orangey ground. Nice contrast to the top third of the image with the dark blue clouds and the white clouds rolling in over the mountain, partially obscuring the mountain. But overall I think this image works quite well. And I'm quite surprised that it does work, because when I took it I thought it was a bit too busy. But sometimes a busy image can work, and I think this is one of those cases. This is definitely one I'm going to print quite large, and then hopefully it'll be even more enjoyable. Yes, here's a composition I like. These rocks in the foreground form some nice leading lines towards the distant mountains and the clouds above them. On the left hand side we've got the green, very green bush, and another one behind it. Unfortunately the two of them merge, but it doesn't matter that much in this case. Unfortunately we still have the very busy bush on the right hand side, so maybe again I will try a vertical shot here. Maybe that'll work better. Yes, indeed, I think the vertical shot works better here. I'm going to try it like this. I've got to be quick, it's starting to rain harder. Plus those clouds are rolling in very quickly now. I definitely prefer this composition, and with a bit of blue sky now showing, if I trim off a little bit, crop off a little bit at the top, just at the grey cloud, that could actually work. This was shot at 17mm. I'm also going to try a slightly longer version, maybe 28mm or so, and then get completely rid of the bush on the left hand side as well. Just have the rocky formation and maybe the clouds. I think this is actually the composition I prefer. Got rid of the busy bushes on both left and right hand side. Nice rock on the foreground, leading lines in the rock going into the distance. Bit of blue in the sky, some clouds, some distant mountains. What more can I ask for? Here we have the image that I shot. First I'm showing you the landscape composition. The one with the trees on the left hand side, or the bushes I should say, and the leading lines basically from the middle of the image into the distance, pointing towards the very distant mountains. That, by the way, has some beautiful detail in them. And then the clouds, low clouds, high layer of cloud, and a bit of blue sky peeking out. Overall, I think it has a lot of potential. I like the image. I like the detail in the sky, and the rocks in the foreground are also beautiful. But I do feel that the bushes on the left and the right hand side are unnecessary details, and they clutter up the image. Here's the vertical composition, the portrait version. I cut out the bushes on the right hand side primarily, and still left the tiny ones on the left hand side. I think this works better. Without the bush on the left hand side, it would have been a bit empty, I think. It gives just enough balance to the image with those bushes on the left hand side. The rocks in the foreground leading into the middle distance, beautiful. Clouds are nice, the sky is nice, a little bit of blue is great. So overall I think this image works, primarily because of the rocks and then the clouds that make it special. But I think this is one of the compositions that I actually like, that I managed to capture today. There is another quite pleasant composition, I think. Again, rock with lichen in the foreground, different colors of lichen, at least 3 different colors. A very interesting tiny little bush. Unfortunately, it's got some grass inside it, also with lichens on it. And then in the background, another mountain, different mountain with foothills, rolling clouds, and it's relatively green for this part of the world. I ended up shooting 2 versions of this image as well. First I shot the portrait version and then the landscape one as well, that I'll show you just now. The portrait version, what I really like about it is the contrast between the foreground and the background. The warm foreground with the orangey colors and the rock, and then the dark blue cold sky with almost angry clouds. The rock with the lichen is really beautiful. It leads your eye into the image, into the middle distance towards that little bush, interesting little bush, and then up into the sky with rather complicated and beautiful clouds. Now the landscape version shows less of the clouds, but it shows more the foreground, and now the rock is in the bottom left hand corner, and we have an even better leading line going from bottom right towards the center of the image. But we've lost out those beautiful clouds at the top. So I'm not sure which version you prefer. Please let me know. Personally, I think I prefer the portrait version, but it's debatable. Interestingly enough, it looks like the wind direction has changed, because the clouds were rolling in from that side across, and now they're actually moving backwards, and that happened in a few minutes. Just had a shower, so it's a bit wet. I'm a bit wet. Fortunately, it's not cold, probably about 21 degrees Celsius, something like that. But I think that's basically it for today. I did manage to get a couple of very nice cloud formations over in the distance, plus some, at least 2, maybe 3 interesting compositions, including rocks and the rolling clouds over the mountains. I think that's all quite usable. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Thanks for spending some time with me on another one of my little adventures. Not typical of the desert today. It's a bit wet, and that's perfect. If you want any details on my equipment or where you can buy some photos, look in the description below. If you want serialized prints, signed, limited edition, please contact me direct. Thanks for watching again. If you like what you saw, please give me a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next video. Have a great day. Keep well and keep safe. Bye-bye.